Hello and welcome to another episode of the Trash Talk Podcast. I'm your host, JJ pimpkarp. How are you doing?
Doing well, how about you?
I'm doing well as well. But, I'm doing well too. That sounds better. And today, we're once again going to be talking a lot about video games, because that's like the one thing that I know we have in common. And Our first topic is, are video games art? And I'm gonna give the first word to you.
I 100% agree that they are art, in all honesty. I don't think you can... I mean, you can make an argument, obviously, but I don't see how you can prove that video games aren't art with how many different ways you can tell a story, with how varied a video game can be as a form of entertainment to say it's not art. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I feel like you can make the argument that maybe not all video games are art, but that's kind of like saying not all movies are art or not all books are art. It's like, yeah, sure, you can make that argument about any type of art, but it seems kind of silly for some people when they like say that video games aren't an art form, because realistically, how could it not be, right? If you consider that cinema is an art form, and then some video games, it's like, oh yeah, it's basically just a bunch of cutscenes with like a couple of quick time events in between, right? Something like the Telltale games, like, people will literally say, oh, it's just a glorified movie. But if movies are art, then the glorified movie over here is basically art as well, right? As sort of the simplest argument. And I think there are a lot of things that are sort of more unique to video games that don't necessarily... I don't know if they make them more or less of an art form, but certainly... Because art fundamentally is about expression, right? So if you have more things you can do, then there is more space for artistic expression. So, you have, as we said, right? You mentioned story, right? And that's kind of not necessarily something that's necessary for art. Obviously, art traditionally, when we think of paintings, probably is the first thing you think of when I say art. Yeah. And those don't. I mean, they can tell a story, but they don't necessarily do. They're kind of just one frame. And a video game can have a story, but it doesn't have to. And I think even if it doesn't, it still is a form of art, although most games do arguably have some capacity of a story.
Oh yeah, a little bit. I'm not going to argue that the 7th or 8th or 9th iteration of Call of Duty is a form of art at that point, but there's so many cool games out there that take an idea that's maybe been done before, maybe not, and making it in a format that's only available in video games. Like, I'm pretty sure I've talked about this with you, for instance, BioShock, the first one.
Yeah.
They're apparently making that into a movie or a show now. I don't see how... I don't know how you're going to make that into having the same impact that the game had, where the central plot of the game forces you to do something about halfway through that's not going to be able to be replicated in movies. And then, even if you're going to go further off track, like you were talking about how not all video games have like a strong story, maybe even much of a story at all. Some of those games can be the coolest forms of art. Like there's a lot of really cool puzzle games out there that do some really, really cool things with just bending your perspective, with using like color schemes or music patterns as a form of puzzle. There's so many things that are out there that video games have the ability to do that any other form of entertainment doesn't really have.
Yeah, I think actually perspective is an interesting thing, because perspective obviously does play a role in art in general, but video games are kind of the only thing where it can really have a sort of a more dynamic approach with that. I mean, maybe it's a bit pedantic to get into like every single detail, but like you said, for puzzle games to play with perspective, for example, you don't really have anything equivalent to that in any other art form, right? Like paintings have perspective, and cinema, you certainly have camera angles, but
yeah.
And I guess even in literature, you have sort of characters' perspectives and stuff like that, but you can only really play with perspective in the, I want to say in a static way almost, right? I mean, obviously, film will be moving, but in video games, because of the control you have, and oftentimes you'll have either control over where a character is facing, or even being able to turn the camera. I mean, it's a very basic thing in modern games oftentimes. And so, I guess that element of perspective feels almost very different when it's done in video games in a way that you can't really replicate in other media. where you have
yeah.
Superliminal, for example, comes to mind, which we've played recently on the channel, where obviously if you have to like line up something, and then if it looks a certain way, then it becomes that way, and like if objects are closer, they might appear bigger, and then they are.
Yeah. No, I was actually thinking about that game when this topic came up when we started going into it, because I've actually never played it. It's been on my wish list for a while, but I've seen some footage of it enough to get a general idea of the game. And that's one of those where it's like you said, you have to orient your perspective in such a way to be able to complete certain puzzles. And no other form of media is going to be able to do that. No other form of media is going to be able to replicate that same sense of perspective like that game does. And I've played a couple other like mobile games like that. I had another point that you had touched on. With perspective with games. So you can read a book and it can be told from the first person's perspective for the entirety of the book, and you can try to put yourself into that person's shoes. You can try to emulate what that person's feeling with their actions. But unless you're reading a choose your own adventure book, you don't have a choice in the book. You're just reading what somebody else has already done for you. With like open world video games, for instance, like The Witcher, the level of choice that you have in some of these missions is ridiculous, and you can't replicate that in anything, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I guess in terms of choice, there's technically one situation where I can replicate it even more, but that's not necessarily also seen as a traditional art form, which is, of course, tabletop role-playing games, where you have even more freedom than that, and those oftentimes do have emergent stories, although those can also happen in video games, right? So, for example, if you have something like a sandbox game, you can oftentimes have maybe a story that isn't even written into the game, but that kind of just develops. Say you have an online Minecraft server, right? You can have almost not necessarily a storyline in the sort of scripted sense, but you almost have developing stories, if you like, with player factions or stuff like that, which no one really planned it, but it still happens, and it almost creates a narrative in its own right, even though there wasn't really a prescribed narrative from the creator of the game. So that's, I think, also something that's unique to gameplay. Although, on the perspective point that you said, which I initially brought up, but the lining up things, actually, technically, there is one other situation where that kind of happens, which is three-dimensional art, like sculptures and some such. There are ones where if you look at it from one side, it shows one thing, and then if you look at it from another angle, it shows something else. Where they like very cleverly outlined it. So it's technically not entirely unique, but that's
I agree.
About as much interaction as you're going to get with other art forms.
Yeah, no, I will agree with that one for sure, because there's some really cool artwork out there that I've seen that does that kind of perspective bending feat. And like you said with tabletop games, that reminded me of another one. I kind of would, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I would lump kind of tabletop games in the whole semblance of games, like board games, that kind of thing. I would maybe lump in with gaming in general. But one game that came to mind when it comes to choice is, what is it called? Divinity Original Sin. That's a good one, because that's a classic RPG style game where you have so much freedom of choice that you can kind of just do anything. You can, just attack anybody that you see. You can screw up the story for the game, I'm pretty sure, by attacking just about anybody. But one that I've played a lot of, I've only played a little bit of that, is Disco Elysium, where there's no actual combat in the game. You just kind of walk around talking to people and building your story. But within the first 5 minutes of the game, you can die by trying to reach for your tie, and you're so hungover that your character just dies from trying to reach for his tie that's stuck up on the ceiling fan. And then you leave your room eventually, and you talk to a woman that's outside of it, and you can try to proposition her. And depending on what skill attributes you start out with, you can have a little bit of charisma, and she'd be like, okay, I see you. Or if you fail the check, you get a very, very hilarious interaction where you say something very, very inappropriate by accident, and then she laughs at you and makes you repeat it just to mock you with how terrible it was. So it's just within the first 5 to 10 minutes of the game, I loved the depth of choice that the game gave you, and just how you want to play your character. Do you want to play like a cool and collected smart guy? Do you want to play like a braggadocious idiot and just run around thinking you're the hero of your own story, while in reality everyone just kind of hates you because you're just a drunk a-hole? it's kind of crazy how much variability you can get from something like that with how many choices that the game or form of media gives you.
Yeah, I guess player freedom is one of those things that you can have in your game or you cannot have it. It's kind of a design choice, right? And I mean, obviously, game design, just the fact that it's called design kind of gives you a bit of a hint about the art behind it. But it certainly is interesting, like the kind of experiences that you can give people because of the freedom that's in there, right? Because if something happens to your character in one of those sort of in those games where you have a lot of free choice and you have dialogue trees and you have RPG-like elements, that sort of thing where, well, they're role-playing games after all. And so it almost breaks down the separation between the character and the player to some degree, where, you know, if something happens to the character, especially if it is the result of an action that you took as a player, it feels a lot more personal than if something happens to a character in a novel or in a movie. I'm not saying you can't connect with those characters, but it's a completely different kind of connection that you have with a character that you've maybe even had a hand in creating. Oftentimes you have character customization, or at the very least you had a hand in shaping their story, whereas, of course, in other more static media, you don't really have that control. Yeah.
No, there's been a few times where I've played a game where that's either been a part of a series or part of a long enough game that you kind of develop like a, I don't want to say a connection, but you kind of start to like some of the characters that the game gives you, and you get to a point where something happens to them and it can hurt. Like, I'm not going to go into spoiler territory, obviously, but games like Last of Us 2, Mass Effect 3, stuff like that, where you have these long-running games that are very narratively driven, that you have characters that start to become like a regular part of your roster, your team, especially with Mass Effect, with the larger team that you can bring with you. And something happens to a character that's been around since the inception of the game, and you're like, oh, holy crap, that actually kind of hurts a little bit. And, you know, they're just pixels at the end of the day, but it's just like a good book. You start to feel for the characters, or like a TV show where the main character dies after 6 seasons, and you're like, well, shit, what now?
Yeah, and I would assume in some ways that can hit almost more intensely than the aforementioned TV and book examples, because your relationship to those characters is in part forged by interaction with them, whereas in the show or in the book, you obviously only have that sort of parasocial attachment, which can still create a lot of strong emotions, of course. And I mean, parasocial phenomena have been much more talked about in the days of social media, because that happens a lot more with real people now, where, you know, we feel like we have a relationship with someone that doesn't even know us, which is very different when we're talking about a real person versus a character on screen. But obviously with the video game characters, we have, in a way, a relationship, but then obviously they're still just pre-programmed responses, but our choices might affect the relationship with that character in a way that just wouldn't have happened in a movie or a TV show.
I agree 100%.
Anything else? I feel like
we exhausted that pretty well.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, it was relatively short, but that doesn't have to be a problem. In which case, actually, maybe one of the earliest times that we've ever had on the show, how about we move on to Fact of the Week?
Okay.
What is your Fact of the Week?
So, my Fact of the Week is that, let's say a set of twins, both boys, both meet a set of twins that are girls, and they have kids together. If the kids of the twins were to eventually have kids together, like unrelated, you know what I mean? Wait, is that how it is? I forget. It's been a while since I've read it, but I'm pretty sure that the kids of the twins would essentially be brothers, but also like uncles or cousins. I forget the exact thing, but the kids would be very, very closely related, almost like they were actually brothers of the initial parents. It's very complex. I forget how exactly it worked out. Let me see if I can pull it up.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense, right? Because I think identical twins, at the very least, would have basically the same genes as their siblings. So
okay, I found it. So apparently the babies are cousins, but genetically brothers. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Because identical twins will have the same genetic code as their twin siblings, so then if you have two pairs of twins and you match them up, then it's basically like you're matching up the same person twice over, or the same pair of people twice over. And so their kids will effectively be like siblings, as you said. That's interesting, I suppose. It's one of those things that really makes sense when you think about it, but it's maybe something that doesn't really occur to you just randomly. So I do sometimes like this where it's like, obviously that's true, but have you ever thought about it? Now, mine is as obvious, but I certainly have thought about it a lot. And that is, I recently saw an article about uterus transplants in Australia. They were talking about how they were like now going into a trial, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I mean, obviously, don't see the necessity in it, but I guess it's a cool thing. And so I looked a bit more into it, and it turns out it's not exactly a new procedure. I mean, I think it's new in Australia, but it has been around for a while. And since I like guessing questions about facts, when do you think was the first uterus transplant that I could find on Wikipedia? I'm saying it that way because I don't know if there had been any others that are just undocumented here, but the first one that I could find.
1973.
1931.
Whew.
Dang. Yeah, I wouldn't have necessarily thought that, because it seems like the kind of thing that, you wouldn't necessarily do unless you have, like, really advanced science, because, again, it's not necessarily something that's going to save your life. So why would you attempt it if you don't need it? But they attempted it, and as a matter of fact, the reason why they attempted this, obviously, is because a woman wanted to have a child, and in this case, the woman just straight up didn't have a uterus because, and this is where the story, I think, gets a lot more interesting, the woman we're talking about here is Lily Elbe, who was a Danish painter and transgender woman. So, in the 30s, a trans woman was the first recipient of a uterus transplant. Now, she died due to complications of the surgery 3 months later, so it was by no means successful, but I find it kind of fascinating, right? I mean, first of all, to some people, the idea of being trans seems like a more modern phenomenon. Of course, if you actually know your history, you know that's not true, but also like the sort of trans-related surgeries coming about in the 20s and 30s is one of those things that I think a lot of people don't really realize. And the fact that the uterus transplant was one of those surgeries is kind of wild to me, because it seems like a pretty high-level thing, because these days, not a single trans person is getting one, right? As a matter of fact, the ethics code that was outlined for uterus transplants specifically says that the recipient should be a genetic female, which, let's just say that genes aren't everything when it comes to, not just gender, but also sex, right? Physical sex characteristics are determined by your hormone levels and how receptive your receptors are to those hormones, which are in turn influenced by your genes, but it's more complicated than most people think. Point being, I thought this was an interesting story, right? I looked into the uterus transplants, and all of a sudden, I find this case from the 30s where a trans woman got a uterus transplant, and again, she died 3 months later due to complications of surgery, so it's not that successful. I think there was the next attempt that they list here is in 2000, 70 years later, which also wasn't successful, but, that just tells you, eventually we got it. I'm not going to go through every single case, because apparently there have been many successful cases.
A lot more.
And also many children born due to those surgeries, which is the whole point of them. I guess the one thing that I could mention is that those transplants are usually temporary. So, because of organ rejection, you don't necessarily want to have a foreign organ inside of you. And so, the general idea is that you get the transplant for 5 years, and you basically try to have as many kids as you want in that time frame, and then you just take it out again. So that you don't have to keep taking anti-rejection drugs for the rest of your life, which also, of course, are immunosuppressants, so that's also not great. That is the story about uterus transplants. On a completely different note, we wanted for the Aftermath show to play a little game. I've played with other people on the show, but you told me you have not played it yet. And so, we're gonna see how well you know languages.
Probably not very.
This is Language Squad, the greatest language identifying and guessing game. We're gonna go for audio. I think I have everything set up so you can hear the audio. And the question becomes, what difficulty do you want to play? Easy, medium, or hard? So, easy is 24 languages, medium is 58, and hard has 92. That can come up. And it's a multiple choice guessing game. Of which language is it?
I mean, we could start off with medium and always switch to easy if we decide it's too much.
Okay. Medium going to easy if it's too much. So, the options here... wait, actually, can you read the options? Because then I don't have to necessarily read them out.
Japanese, Slovenian, Russian.
No, I'm just... Generally, I was asking because we don't have to read every one of them out, but I've had guests before who said, like, because of, like, the bitrate of the transmission or something, like, it was too blurry. So
that's fine.
Let's listen to what they have to say.
Отжался от пола и на руках прошел в кухню. Мама мамуля мамулиссима, привыкшая ко всему, поставила чашечку кофе ему на ступни, и он ушел в комнату. Оставалось совсем немного позвонить и узнать, когда уходит сегодняшний поезд.
I mean, I have a strong suspicion.
Yeah, I'm gonna assume it's the same as mine. I'm just gonna guess Russian.
I think so too. The problem is I think Slovenian is also a Slavic language, so it could technically be both. I mean, I think we're both fairly certain it's not Japanese.
It's not.
I heard a couple of words that I know exist in Russian, so I'm thinking it's probably Russian because it might be slightly different if it was Slovenian. So yeah, it's Russian.
And it's Russian.
Next one. Also, by the way, if you know what it is, you can just say it so that I don't, like... I'm just playing the clip however long I think you might need, but...
ค่ะท่านผู้ฟังคะขณะนี้คุณณรงค์ศักดิ์จันมีศรีสื่อมวลชนอิสระชาวไทยในออสเตรเลียก็อยู่ในสายกับ
Okay, I'm gonna guess it's Thai. It's 100% not French.
Yeah, and Slovak is another Slavic language, so I'm pretty sure it's Thai as well.
Yep.
Okay, this one should probably be relatively easy as well.
Still feels like winter.
That was it. It happens. So,
sorry, that was the tough one.
The way the difficulties work, right, is just you get more languages in the pool, but all the easy languages are still in here. So you do occasionally get an really easy one.
Gotcha. Oh boy, okay.
Keinem tommen nicht paniken oder euch stellen auf eine Strophe, was soll sein unmenschlich, achsariesdig oder degradierend.
Yeah, you can stop it. It's Yiddish.
Yeah. I mean, I find Yiddish always very interesting because you can understand it, right? So,
yeah.
I don't know if you know the history of Yiddish, but it's basically the Jews that lived in the German-speaking area of Europe basically started speaking German. I don't know if they had the accent already at the time or if they developed it after, but it's basically just an accented version of German with some Hebrew words thrown in. So,
gotcha.
Unless they're using a Hebrew word, I can usually pretty much understand what they're saying. Afrikaans is spoken, of course, in South Africa, and I think also a couple of other countries around there, I think Namibia as well. And is basically Dutch. So, also kind of similar, but not quite that. So, that doesn't sound that hard, but we'll see.
Ja som v roku 91, keď som sa prisťahoval do Prahy, tak môj známy, ja som vyrastal s jedným kamarátom, ktorý bol fotograf pro Mladú frontu a jeho otec bol vtedy ešte šéfom FAMu. Tam bola tmavá komora, takže vlastne oni ma tým celým previedli, tým fotografovaním. Ja som vždycky mal...
Any ideas?
I have no idea what Bengali sounds like at all. I mean, it almost sounds like it could be Slovak.
I'm going to tell you that much. Bengali is spoken in India. Now that...
yeah.
So I think it's Slovak, because I think it sounded Slavic to me.
It did, yeah.
So, yeah, let's go with that, and yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And yeah...
now you got 4 options.
Yeah, I think it's every 5 questions you get an additional option up until 9 options.
Oh. Jeez, okay.
It also ends when we make 3 mistakes, so I don't think we'll get to 9 options on medium. I did, just for the fun of it, shortly before we started recording, try it on beginner with like 11 languages, and it's like almost trivial. Like, I got like, I don't know how many points. It's way too easy.
Cela n'est pas possible parce que de nombreux témoins
It's so French.
sont...
Yeah.
The only other language I speak a tiny bit of.
Yeah, so I also speak French, so like that was also like, yeah. Oh God. Oh God.
Шановні радіослухачі, в одній із попередніх наших радіопрограм було подано інтерв'ю.
We all know what that was, right?
Ukrainian.
Yeah. And so I was scared there for a second because Haitian Creole is a French-based Creole language. And, I mean, obviously, I would presumably understand French well enough to know that it's not Haitian Creole and vice versa, but those two could technically be confused.
Yeah.
Saudara pendengar, dalam kampanye pemilu kali ini, kedua partai besar berusaha untuk menarik kelompok-kelompok migran baru untuk menjadi pendukung mereka. Salah satu kelompok baru yang sedang berkembang adalah yang saat ini
I mean, have a guess?
Yeah. Indonesian, maybe? Or Filipino?
I think it's Indonesian.
That's what my first hunch would be.
First of all, I think Filipino is actually called Tagalog, but that's the point.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no, I don't think that's it. And it's certainly not Italian, and it doesn't really seem Slavic to me, which Serbian, I believe, is also. There's so many languages in, like, Eastern Europe, and I think pretty much all of them are Slavic, except for, like, one or two.
Yeah.
I think, what is spoken in Eastern Europe besides Slavic languages and, Hungarian?
Yeah. Yep.
Բարոն Ռադեսավն նաև, որ իր տնտեսական ռազմավարությունը հստակ է, մինչ վճռական քվեները ապահովելու պայքարը կսկսի, բարոն Ռադեսավ, որ ժամանակն է, որ թրականությունը վերադարձվի քաղաքականության մեջ, անասավ, որ որոշումը, թե ով պիտի առաջնորդի երկիրը, այժմ պիտի փոխանցվի առանց թեմքի մարդոցմե թեպի ավասալիացի ժողովուրդը, մինչ այն ընդդիմության ղեկավար խոստացավ իսկական փոփոխություն, համախոհներ պատրաստ են առաջնորդելու
I'm relatively certain it's not Portuguese.
Maybe Armenian?
I was leaning towards Armenian because I think if I'm thinking, so geographically what I'm hearing, it almost seems like we're almost kind of sort of on an intersection between Slavic and Semitic. I know it's not how it works, but like geographically I think Armenia would fit with sort of that acoustic perception the best, but I might also be completely off base here. But yeah, I mean, if we both said it, we might as well choose it. Yeah, there we go.
Diğer yandan ise Mehmet Selim Kiraz'a yapılan suikast birdenbire gündemden düştü. Neden böyle oldu? Türkiye gündeminde ismimiz Ahu Özyurt'ta tekrar birlikteyiz. Ahu, milletvekili aday listeleri Yüksek Seçim Kurulu'na sunuldu. Partilerin listelerinde neler ön plana çıktı?
I have a actually strong suspicion, but I'm not confident either.
Maybe Arabic, maybe Swahili.
I was thinking Turkish because a lot of the U sounds, they're very typical for Turkish.
Okay. I'll go with that.
Arabic has a lot more like the sort of the throaty h sort of sounds that I didn't hear any of at all.
Yeah.
Faroese should be a Germanic language, so I don't think that's it. I think it's Turkish. Yeah. Come on! They have Danish and Norwegian.
Mm-hmm.
They have 3 Germanic languages, and you're 2 of which are North Germanic. Let's give it a shot.
Det sier talsperson for naboene på Sørbråten ved Utøya, Maria Holtane Berge. I dag kom det frem at staten har foreslått å skrote det planlagte minnestedet etter 22. juli-terroren på Sørbråten ved Utøya. Kunstverket Memory Wound deler en odde i 2, som et sår i naturen. Regjeringens forslag er å droppe det planlagte minnestedet laget av kunstneren Jonas Dahlberg og finne et nytt minnested.
I'm gonna guess Norwegian.
I'm fairly confident it's North Germanic, but again, there could also be Danish. So the Danes have a reputation for not speaking very clearly, so I'm gonna say it's probably Norwegian. But, as you said, like, honestly, I wouldn't be able to tell you one from the other, really. That's same problem whenever I see one of them written, right? It's always like, that looks North Germanic to me, and then you go like, oh yeah, does the A like have a little circle over it, does it have two dots, and it's like, and then which language does what, and then, oh god. It was Norwegian. Okay. I think that one was genuinely hard, given that we don't speak either of those languages, and very similar. Oh god, and here we come with first of all, a lot of East Asian languages.
Japanese, Vietnamese, Chinese.
I mean Mongolian as well, right? I mean,
yeah.
And also it's Chinese Yue, right? It's not Cantonese or Mandarin. It's like a weird Chinese language shit I've never heard of. So great.
Okay.
I think we're, weirdly enough, maybe best off with Urdu.
Maybe.
का सूबा बलूचिस्तान और उसका सदर मुकाम कोयटा यहाँ से अक्सर पुरतशद्दुद कार्रवाइयों और कत्ल गारतगरी के वाक़यात से भरपूर खबरें ज़राए अबलाग में नुमायां रहती हैं, मगर आज हम आपको बलूचिस्तान के दारुल हुकूमत कोयटा से ताल्लुक़ रखने वाले एक हसास तबा शायर से मिलवा रहे हैं जो 4 ज़बानों में शायरी करते हैं। ये हैं सिडनी में मुकीम सादिक सबा साहब को खुशामदीद कहता हूँ। ज़रा हमारे सुनने
Almost tempted to say Urdu, but
I actually think it might be Urdu.
I'm fairly certain it's not Japanese.
It's not.
And it doesn't really sound that Chinese to me, but again, Yue I wouldn't be able to place. And similarly, Mongolian would also be somewhat similar to Chinese, just again, to me as an absolute not knowing anything. Vietnamese I would also, I think it's Urdu. I can't really say it with any degree of confidence. So.
Yep.
Well, Urdu is an option again.
Probably not gonna be that one this time, but we'll see.
Az Alfa Romeo nevű szörnyeteget ártalmatlanná tették. Aranyalkat részeitől megfosztva nem árthatott többi embertársainak. Lelkét átadta Abepadan király győztes seregeinek, akik felfegyverkeztek általa. A dél-afrikai oázisok népe között még ma is szájról szájra jár a legenda egy kísérteties, lerongyolódott katonáról, aki egy szál oroszlán társaságában kóborol.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it's Serbian.
I don't. It didn't sound that Slavic to me. I'm thinking it might be Hungarian, but I honestly I don't know. It's just a guess either.
Oh yeah,
I'm gonna give you the Hungarian final choice.
No, we can go Hungarian. Yeah, I wasn't 100% sold on it.
Oh
yeah,
that's an interesting mix.
În afară de acestea, nu se va face nicio deosebire după statutul politic, juridic sau internațional al țării sau al teritoriului de care ține o persoană, fie că această țară sau teritoriu sunt independente, sub tutelă, neautonome sau supuse vreunei alte limitări a suveranitate. Articolul 3. Orice ființă umană are dreptul la viață, la libertate și la securitatea persoanei sale. Articolul 4. Nimeni nu va fi ținut în sclavie.
So, it sounded like the words are from a Romance language, which actually I shouldn't talk too much because I always want to hear your opinion first. But what were you thinking about that? It was very quiet. It's the first thing I was thinking. But
if I had to go with my gut, it might be Maltese, but not 100%.
So, what do you know about Maltese as a language?
Not a lot.
Maltese is a Semitic language spoken in Malta. So it's related to Arabic, but it has a lot of Romance language influences. So, long story short, based on the amount of Romance language words that I've heard, I'm more tempted to go Romanian, but Maltese is still very possible because a lot of again, he was reading some sort of like declaration or something. There was like Article 3, Article 4. So,
yeah.
A lot of the very technical words would come from Romance languages in Maltese as well. The numbers seemed Romance though, which I'm not sure if the Maltese numbers would be of a Semitic root or of a Romance root. So that's the main question for me here, but it is likely one of those two.
Okay, I'm fine with Romanian. I'm very unclear on this one.
Yeah, it was Romanian.
Mandarin.
Well, at least it's relatively recognizable compared to this. Hebrew should also be relatively recognizable. Hausa is I don't know anything about it, but it's spoken somewhere in Africa, so it wouldn't be that unlikely to be different from the other ones, right? We have a Slavic language, a Turkic one. I don't actually know what the Chinese language is, which group they belong to, and a Semitic one, so it should be fairly diverse.
בשניהם אפשר להציע הצעת חוק, חוץ מהצעת התקציב שרק בית הנבחרים יכול לעלות, אבל דרך אגב זה דרוש את אישור הסנאט.
It's Hebrew.
Yeah, it's one of those very recognizable. Oh God, they have 3 Slavic languages in here. 3.
Yeah, but then they also have Yiddish and French, so
yeah,
that helps out a little bit, hopefully.
Зелените успея да извлечат неколку барања и ветувања од лабористичката малцинска влада во замена за нивна подкрепа. Не сите ветувања беа исполнети од лабористичката влада. Лидерот на Зелените после 16 години во федералната политика напушти во април 2012. Предавајќи ја должноста на сенаторката, тој ги одби наводите дека неговата партија ќе се соочи со бурни времења по неговото напуштање.
It's Slavic.
Maybe Polish?
Honestly, let's just go with Polish because I don't have any strong tendencies. Macedonian.
Damn, Macedonian. Would not have even thought to pick that one.
Like, again, for me, this was like a pretty much equal toss-up between Polish, Macedonian, and Ukrainian. Because again, all Slavic languages. Yeah. Now, technically, there are different subgroups of Slavic languages, I think, but still, that's a tough one.
Artikel 2. Elke persoon het die reg tot al die regte en vryhede, soos in die verklaring vervat is, sonder uitsondering van enige aard, soos op grond van ras, geslag, kleur, taal, godsdienst, geboorte of enige ander status. Daarbenewens sal geen onderskeid op grond van politieke, gerechtelike of internasionale status van die land of gebied.
That's interesting. I think I know what it is, but it's interesting.
Afrikaans?
I think so. But the interesting thing is, if Yiddish had been an option, I might have actually picked that. Which is the dangerous part about this, because I didn't expect Afrikaans to sound like that exactly. But yeah, because I got a lot. I mean, I didn't get like every word, but I got a lot of what you were saying. And that's like...
Yeah.
Shockingly much, I would say. Oh, God. Actually, this might not be terrible.
Ne zaman ki siyasiler alışveriş merkezlerine gider ve orada çocukları kucaklar ve öperlerse bilin ki seçimler yakındadır. Bunu belki biraz daha genişleterek şöyle diyebiliriz. Ne zaman ki siyasiler camileri ziyaret etmeye başlarlar, seçimler yakındadır. Ramazan bayramı olması nedeniyle hem Liberal Parti'den hem İşçi Partisi'nden siyasiler Sydney'de ve Melbourne'de camileri ziyaret ederek Müslüman toplumla sohbette bulundular.
This is tricky because I went a couple different places there in my mind, and now I'm not so sure, because at first there was like a bit of the like I thought it might be Arabic, but it doesn't really sound that Arabic to me. But then again, there are like tons of different dialects, so like who's to say? Then I thought it might sound from like the rhythm and everything, it sounded a bit more Turkic, but again, Turkish specifically has a lot of like U and Ö sounds and stuff, which I didn't really notice that much at all. I think there was like one or two, but like it seemed almost too rare for what you normally hear in the Turkish examples. That's not to say that it can't be. Maybe it just happened to have a couple of words in there that don't have it in. But now I'm thinking, in what language family even is Tamil? I know it's spoken in India and I think also in Singapore, but like that doesn't mean necessarily that it belongs to a certain group, right?
No.
Because there's a lot of linguistic variety in India, so I'm pretty sure it's one of those three that I just talked about, but...
I'm fine with guessing Arabic. Damn.
Turkish. Again, like, it sounded kind of Turkish to me, but there was, like, some of the sounds that I usually listen for in Turkish were, like, barely present, and so...
Yeah.
It seemed just slightly off. Oh, God, that's also... Okay, possibly, maybe?
Zëdhënësi i shtëpisë së bardhë Jay Carney tha se vendimi i Rusisë për t'i dhënë strehim Snowden minon qëndrimin e Rusisë në bashkëpunimin me fushën e ligjit në Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës. Ish kontraktori i Agjencisë të Sigurimit Kombëtar Amerikan ka qëndruar gjatë 6 javëve të fundit në aeroportin e Moskës. Presidenti rus Vladimir Putin injoroi kërkesën e administratës së Obamës që Snowden të kthehej në Shtetet e Bashkuara për të përballur me akuzat për spionazh lidhur me zbulimin e praktikës së përgjimit të amerikanëve.
The difficult thing with these sort of things always is, like, half of this was, like, names. And...
Yeah.
That can kind of throw you off, I feel like. Because... And then there was, like... There was something about espionage in there, so, like, that certainly is a Romance root, but then again, it's a very international word as well. I think it...
Yeah.
I mean, it exists in English, obviously, which has a lot of Romance roots. It exists in German, right? Like, that's... Well, without the E, but... I'm pretty sure it's not Dutch. Let's start with that. I don't think it's Thai necessarily, though I'm not 100% sure on that. Maltese is always a complicated one, but I don't think so. Which leaves us with a really interesting selection of Tamil, Estonian, and Albanian. That is if my exclusions were correct, which I don't have that high degree of confidence in either, but... Estonian is related to Finnish, which makes me... I don't know. That doesn't seem... I'm almost tempted to say Tamil or Albanian, but... Maybe Tamil? I'm just guessing, right?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. My initial thought was it sounded a little Dutch, but I don't know enough about it, I guess, to know for sure.
I don't think that was Dutch. Let's put it that way, but that doesn't
necessarily... No, you know more. You know more than I do, so...
It was Albanian.
Oh.
I think there was probably also enough of this.
Damn.
We answered 19 questions, out of which we got 16 correct and 3 wrong. I don't think we need to play again necessarily. That was quite a bit.
No, I think we did pretty well.
I think so as well. And I think you also did pretty well, considering that there was a lot of things that you didn't necessarily have that much reference for, but... I mean, I usually asked you first, and you oftentimes gave the correct answer. And I mean, for example, the last one you gave the wrong answer, but so did I, so it's not like...
Yeah.
It's not like that really...
I mean, I just don't have... I'm in the US, so we don't have as much cultural exploration in terms of different accents and different languages, that kind of thing. So
see,
I try to pick up what I can when I can.
It's true that a lot of Americans, especially, native English speakers, tend to not necessarily learn a lot of other languages, but at the same time, it's a very multicultural country, right? Especially in the larger cities, you basically can, within like 1 or 2 city blocks, encounter like a dozen different languages easily.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not exactly within the city block, because oftentimes they are a bit more, like, there are, like, neighborhoods that are, like, oh, this is, like, Chinatown, and this is Little Italy, and, this is Spanish Harlem, and this, And I'm pretty sure all of those exist in New York, by the way, so...
Yeah, pretty much.
So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of variety there as well, so I think it certainly is present, especially in large cities, but you just have to kind of, keep an open mind and an open ear, and I think you'll definitely find some stuff as well there, but I mean, it doesn't necessarily help you if you don't know what language you're speaking, and then later you want to guess languages, it doesn't help you if you don't already know the language, or don't know what language you're speaking at the very least. Now, our second topic, however, is not about languages, but about, well, I guess about art forms, but probably more specifically video games, but we'll see where it takes us. We're going to talk about realism. So I guess the question would be, about like, should video games be realistic, or when is it too much realism, that sort of idea, and then maybe more broadly to other art forms as well, if it becomes too brief of a conversation. I know it was very broad, but I think...
No, you're fine. I think that depends on the type of video game. Certain forms of video games lends to having a more realistic art form, like a lot of like permadeath games, a lot of games that are survival based where you have to collect food and resources and stuff like that, where like the temperature can affect your character and all that kind of thing. That kind of stuff I think definitely should be realistic, but I feel like it would be really, really awful if Call of Duty had realistic bullet damage, where you take a shot in the kneecap and you're left crawling on the ground until you die for the rest of the match. Like that wouldn't make for a very fun experience online, I don't think.
Yeah, the interesting thing is the first thing that I thought of when you said it depends on the game is like realistic Tetris, realistic Pac-Man. It's like, because those are so far out there that they can't really be realistic.
Yes.
But I suppose, yeah, I see we have to talk about games where it does make sense. And the first thing that I think of always when it comes to the question of realism is oftentimes what you said, right? The idea that any game that involves you shooting other players probably shouldn't be all too realistic, because you're going to get a lot of problems if like one shot can just kind of effectively take you out of the match, even if it doesn't necessarily kill you. So you need a very specific type of game, and even in a lot of games where they do pay a bit more attention to that, you still oftentimes have, especially single-player games, you tend to have a lot of strong healing, right? Where it's like, okay, so if you get shot in the leg, maybe you do lower your speed for a while, but then you can also just like wrap a bandage around it and you're going to be as good as new.
Yeah.
And I think those things are kind of necessary to make the games enjoyable, right? Because it kind of would suck. You don't want to sacrifice enjoyability or player experience in favor of realism, I guess is what we're getting at especially with the gunfire example, where it's like, oh yeah, you got shot,
I agree.
The game's over. Or like, you fired your gun quite a lot, now you can't hear as well. It's like, no, that sucks.
Or like the Resident Evil games where, you get bit countless times while you're going through the game, but you just keep slapping green herbs and spraying yourself with first aid sprays to counteract it. But every other character that gets bit in the course of the game, it's just like, I'm bit, guess I'm screwed now. But you're just running around, just getting bit left and right, and you're like, I'm invincible.
Yeah, healing items are interesting.
I feel like that... I mean, it could be a fun game if you played it, like, where you actually had to... If you get bit, you have to start the whole game over again. But, like, even on the RE2 remake, for instance, I'm a huge RE fan, so I've played pretty much all of them. RE2 remake, though, if you get bit once on hardcore mode, you're pretty much always going to be on danger. Occasionally it'll put you in caution, but almost every single time that you get bitten or hit, you're going almost right to danger.
Yeah, I was gonna
say, I do like that.
I was gonna say, like, once you bit the game is over and you have to restart is probably good for like an optional difficulty rather than the game itself, unless you design a game that is like very much built around that, like more like a survival horror game where it's like, oh yeah, like if a zombie comes around the corner, then you run. Because otherwise it's probably not going to be that enjoyable for most players. And I guess there's something to be said about difficulty settings in general, where generally oftentimes lower difficulties will be less realistic, but also oftentimes will make the game more enjoyable for, at the very least, more casual players, where not everyone can be like a hardcore player that like goes into like way too much detail about outlasting every single thing they do, remembering enemy patterns and all that sort of stuff. It's not always realistic to do that. Depending on how much time you have for that game. So I guess there's also another discussion that could be had, but maybe isn't the point right now as much the difficulty question.
You could also go to the other end of the spectrum where it's like overt realism in games can be a huge detraction, not necessarily for like it being a bad thing, more so that it can turn off a lot of players, like you said with like the difficulty level, or like you play something like Flight Simulator where you have to actually be able to fly this thing perfectly, and you have to deal with actual wind conditions, and sometimes people play with actual like real-time distance. Like, you have to do this flight for 2 hours and 57 minutes in order to get there. And if, you can't walk away from your chair, you're flying a plane. So some people would find that interesting and quite enjoyable. Me personally, I feel like that's too much. I play video games to escape from reality, not like spend 3 hours actively trying to keep a plane in the air.
Yeah, I guess if you're playing a simulation game, then it makes sense that you would aim for realism. That's kind of the idea of a simulation, right? So,
well, yeah.
If you don't want to do that, then it might just be not be the game for you. And at some point, you do have to kind of, obviously, when I said like about the, making the game more accessible to more casual players with lower difficulty settings, that is a good choice for some games. But at some point, so certain games are just like, they're built in a way where you can't really do that, and then maybe it's just not a game for you, and you have to play something else. It's not like you can ever play all video games out there anyways.
No, I agree, and that's what I meant. It wasn't like those games are bad, that they're too realistic for their own good. It was just more like, for me personally, those games don't appeal to me because they're so realistic that it's like you actually have to spend a ridiculous amount of time learning how to do this real thing in order to do this well. And it's really cool, and it's fascinating that actually can be done. But it's again, something that's so realistic that I feel like, okay, I'd rather just go and actually learn how to fly a plane, which I wouldn't because heights terrify me.
I mean, I guess that is where the simulator comes in, right? Where, like, it's not dangerous in the simulator. But yeah, no, obviously, I guess the simulator type games do, however, get improved effectively by their realism, even if that does turn some people off. Because if you build a simulator game and you, like, tried simplifying it in certain spots to try to make it more approachable, then the hardcore people that like would want it to be hyper realistic are not going to want to play it, and it might still be too complicated and too involved for the like casual crowd, and so you end up somewhere in the middle where like no one wants to play it. And so I guess you do oftentimes have to just pick a lane as well, where it's just like, oh yeah, this is a simulator, we gotta play this realistically. Maybe there's a couple things you could toggle off, but at the end of the day, it's meant to be realistic. And then on the other hand, you have the games that take more creative liberty, and those are then intended for that audience.
Yeah, it's like you said, you have to kind of pick and choose what kind of audience you're trying to cater to. You could play a game that is very middle of the ground, does a lot of things okay, but doesn't go for anything in particular to kind of excel at, and you can appeal to a lot more people that way. Or you can go and make a more niche category, like a very realistic simulator game, or go to Dark Souls, for instance, an unforgiving, difficult level of game where you have to learn how the game functions in order to be able to beat it. And there's plenty of people out there that say those games are too hard because they're just so difficult. And then there's the obviously very, very rabid fan base that those games tend to have because of the fact that it's like, oh, well, you just don't get it, man.
Yeah, I'm also one of those people that doesn't get it, right? I never played one of those games. As a matter of fact, I might have played like a very minor amount at a friend's house at some point, but like, I never cared about any of those games because I was like, okay, they're known for the difficulty. Well, that's not for me. So the only games in which I would want difficulty, I mean, that's a slightly different discussion, but I guess we can have it, is in more like sort of brain games, right? Like the sort of puzzles or like strategy, stuff like that, where those types of things, I can appreciate difficulty, but anything that's like real time, where you have to react and stuff, is like, no, it's not for me. I don't have like insanely great reaction time, I'm not like MLG pro gamer, that's just not me, right? Like I'll play a first person shooter occasionally, usually Borderlands, right? And that's fine, but like I also like Borderlands, right? I've played Borderlands 2, I think 3 or 4 different characters. I played through the main campaign on like the default difficulty, but then you unlock the next difficulty. I mean, it's like New Game Plus, right? Like it's a very common game concept. They have a different name for it, but and so I've played maybe half of that on one of the characters because just like doesn't interest me as much, right? It's just the same game again but harder. It's like, oh great, it's not like I finished the game already. So yeah, it's just again for different audiences, and I think difficulty settings where since we're already talking about it, difficulty settings where they can be easily implemented I think should oftentimes be an option, where it's like, why wouldn't you kind of try to appeal to more people with like a single toggle, right? Where it's like, why does Pokemon still not have a Nuzlocke mode? Like, what's up with that?
That is dumb.
Like, I bought, what is it, Pokemon Sun or Moon or one of those two, I think, and I barely started it, right? I played a little bit, and I just wasn't that into it, right? And I used to play all the Pokemon games back in the day. I think I literally own at least copies of all the first 4 generations of games, and I've played a lot of those as a kid, and then, I mean, obviously, you know, it's kind of unfortunate because the games get easier while I get older, so that's kind of trending in the exact opposite direction of where it should go for me as the target audience, and not that I'm the target audience necessarily, but it's like, if you just gave me the option to maybe skip the tutorial part, which also becomes more and more, and, you know, maybe have something like Nuzlocke, where it's like a bit more difficult, then maybe I would enjoy the game more, right? It's at least challenging.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, obviously you can set it to yourself for yourself the Nuzlocke challenge, but I don't think I've ever played a Nuzlocke just deciding to do it, because like then you put it down for a month and you're like, oh, did I catch a Pokemon on that route or did I not? And it's like,
I know we're way off topic now at this point, but one of the things that I thought of when we were talking about difficulty sliders, some games do it really poorly, where essentially the difficulty is, oh, hey, you deal less damage, they take more damage, and that's about it. Maybe like healing won't do much. I like the games that kind of tweak it a bit, where like I just started playing Left 4 Dead recently, or Last of Us, sorry. And it's not so much that the enemies take more damage. I don't think they do, actually. I think that you take more realistic damage, which I guess circles back a little bit to what we're talking about. The higher up in difficulty that you go, the damage you take is more realistic. Like, obviously, if you get shot in the leg, you're not going to be limping for the rest of the game. But it's way more indicative of how much damage you would actually get if you were shot in real life. So there's that, and then the resources that you're getting in this, you know, a post-apocalyptic world are way more scarce. And it's funny because I started playing the remake that they did, because it's been a while since I've played it. I figured I'd play, since I don't know if you follow that at all, but it's like a full ground up remake that they did for Last of Us.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen a little bit of gameplay of the original Last of Us when that first came out, and that's pretty much all I know about the franchise. I know it was like a sequel and some remakes, and now they're making a TV show, but like, I don't know the details.
Well, I mean, just to be brief, they created they made it for the PS3 initially, right at the tail end of it, and then they remastered it for the PS4.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of the buzz at the time was like, oh, hey, they're just trying to milk the game again for another generation, which, yeah, you could say that they are. But they did like a full ground up. They revamped the stealth mechanics. They've like a lot of the interactions with enemies are varied. They've completely changed how the game functions in a lot of ways, and obviously updated the graphics along the way, to be specifically for the PS5's hardware. And I started playing it with my wife watching me, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get like maybe 2-3 bullets from here on out. So, you know, for the next hour or two, I'm gonna be walking by all these enemies, and if I miss a single shot, I'm gonna feel really terrible. And 30 minutes later, I have like 15 bullets. I'm like, holy shit, that's so many bullets. For this post-apocalyptic world, I know I'm encountering some enemies, but still, it seemed like, even on the hard difficulty, which is usually right about the precipice of where I want to go, that seemed like a lot of bullets. And there's still 2 difficulties above that. There's like Survivor and Grounded difficulty. And I cannot imagine how little they give you in the hardest difficulty, on top of the fact that they even have a permadeath feature that you can enable on the difficulty that you're on. So it's like maybe about 2 bullets every hour, and then if you get hit twice, you're just dead, and then you have to restart the whole game.
I mean, I guess the prevalence of bullets and realism is like, oh yeah, you are in the US, I think, in that game, so it's like, yeah, there'd be bullets there.
It's probably in the South in the US too, so maybe my estimation of how many bullets left is a little low. You can just roll over somebody's mattress and find maybe like a few extra bullets somewhere in Texas.
It's like the entire mattress is just made of bullets.
It's like the Game of Thrones, the Iron Throne made of swords, but it's just a mattress made of bullets instead. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, anyways, yeah, I think the idea of like the difficulty settings that don't just affect damage or health are definitely interesting. I mean, health regeneration is one of those things that certainly is like sort of in the realm, but also kind of not, where it's like, especially when you have oftentimes the hardest difficulty just doesn't have health regen in some games, where it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like maybe on easy you regen relatively fast, on hard you regenerate slower, and then on like the hardest or whatever, it's just, no, you just don't regenerate. It's like,
no,
realistic.
Good luck.
And, you know, that is certainly an interesting thing. I mean, first of all, it is more realistic depending on over how long time the game takes place. Obviously, humans do heal from injuries, but it's usually, especially when we're talking like the sort of injuries that you take in a lot of video games, like bullet wounds and like stuff like that, where it's like, oh yeah, no, those are going to take a while to heal. And
so it's funny that you say about real recovery from injuries, because as you know, I broke my foot, right?
Yeah.
About 12 weeks ago, I broke my foot, and it's still not fully recovered. And it was a very minor break that did not require surgery on a stupid, like, I twisted my ankle off a little hop that I was doing. And that little thing right there made it so that I could not walk without a boot for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And these people are out here getting blown into cars and, you know, doing things that would have like half of their body broken, and they're like, yep, let me just rub some dirt on it, shake it off, and I'm good to go.
And that's also, I think, why one of my favorite healing items is always the bandages. Because like, oh, yeah, you just fell from like the third story, and like your legs should be broken. You wrap a little bandage around your arm and you're fine again. It's like, first of all, that's not when you got injured. And second of all, bandages don't even heal you in the real world. They just help it not get worse for the most part. I mean, stabilizing a little bit, but like, yeah.
No, you're fine. Did you ever play Resident Evil 7?
No.
Are you familiar with it at all?
Not really.
Okay, so Resident Evil's always had like the first aid sprays and the herbs, that kind of thing is healing. Resident Evil 7, there's a really, really funny moment very early in the game where the father baker of the house that you're kind of stuck in, if he corners you in an area, he will knock you down and with a flat end of a shovel, shove it down through your leg and cut your foot off. And then he will walk away with your foot and hold out a healing, looks like a healing drink that he'll give you. And what you do is you take your stump of a leg, hold it back up to where it was cut off, and pour this healing juice on it, and it just reattaches itself to your leg. And your character's like, what in the hell? And it just doesn't get explained. It's just like, alright, yep, this is happening now.
I guess there's another aspect of realism, though. I feel like oftentimes when the like most far-fetched elements, when they try to implement them in a sort of diegetic way, as in like they exist in the game world, it oftentimes makes it even less realistic, right? So in Borderlands, you have those respawn stations, they're called New You stations. And they always treat them as if they were canon. Which doesn't make sense, right? Because obviously, first of all, the world where anyone can just respawn is kind of weird. And second of all, when other characters die, as you pointed out before, like they're just dead, right? So, obviously I can respawn because I'm the player, that makes sense, like, from an out-of-game perspective. But then why are we treating the stations as if they existed within the game as well, right? So, like, they have dialogue referencing them, and I think there's even one mission where it's like, where it's like, oh yeah, kill yourself. It's like, from the enemy faction, it's like, okay, and you just, like, kill yourself, you get respawned, and then you get the reward for the quest, because you killed yourself. It's like, but they wouldn't know that they couldn't give me a reward for killing myself because I would be dead, except for the fact that those stations exist. Right? And it's like, oh god. Yeah. So I guess one thing that can certainly reduce realism without necessarily, I guess it could be seen as reducing immersion, because realism, of course, is a bit of a broad term, but
yeah,
in games when these items that work on you don't work on NPCs is always one of those things I think that you mentioned where it's like, oh yeah, I'm always fine when I get bitten, but everyone else just dies. I guess that's an element that certainly can take you out of it, even if maybe the scenario, like zombies and magical healing herbs and stuff, is just not realistic to begin with, but it's kind of a part of the world and you kind of accept it. But why does it only work on me is then a very different question. And that is, I mean, obviously in some games it's like, oh yeah, you like Left 4 Dead is like, oh yeah, you're immune. Right? Like the 4 of you are immune, and like no one else is basically, and so that's why you're not a zombie. It's like, okay, cool. That's an explanation. But in some games, it's like, oh yeah, why can I be resurrected but other people can't? Like, if it's like, oh yeah, it's very clearly just like a respawn, like, oh, this is very clearly a video game element, it's like, okay, cool, whatever. But if they try to make it fit, it almost becomes weirder because like, oh, I can respawn but no one else can?
No, I agree. It's kind of one of those things where it's like you have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit to enjoy the game, because if you're going to question every little inconsistency with how the game sets itself, like with the zombies worth getting bitten, or like just in a, I don't know, like in anything where it affects everybody else to a much greater extent, or like, you know, let's say your character has been through hell for the whole game, where they get bad, or they fall from like the third story, they've been exploded and this, that, and the other, and then like the final enemy in the game gets knocked out by some simple little thing that would have been like a brush off for you. It's like, okay, you know, I've been through how much, and this guy gets taken down from... Or, you ever play Mass Effect 3?
No.
Okay. So, great example of this that I'm thinking of is that through the entire game, there's this enemy that's kind of been kicking your whole team's ass. Like, he doesn't get affected by you at all. And I forget how far into the game. But eventually you fight him. And it's this crazy build up to the fight. And then you fight him, and it just... He's the easiest guy on the planet. Like, he does nothing. The actual fight itself is just a walk in the park. It's like, where did all of his powers go, where he was just destroying us up until this point? And then you make us actually fight him outside of a cutscene, and he's just, like, Mr. Rogers up here.
Yeah, I think it's a thing that I've seen pointed out about certain games. So I was like, oh yeah, the cutscenes just do not match the gameplay at all. And it can be very jarring, where it's like, oh yeah, like, in the cutscenes, like... This happens, but then in the actual gameplay, it's just completely different. It's like, okay, that sucks.
Or like where you're wearing some ridiculous fucking costume, where you have like a goofy tall hat, and like, you know, you look like you're a pimp in some alternate reality, essentially. And then you cut to the cutscene, and you're actually wearing your normal clothes that the game wants you to wear, and you look serious, and you only have a pistol. And then it cuts back from the cutscene, and you're back to looking like, you know, the Grand Wizard again, and you have like a rocket launcher and, you know, a battle axe on your back.
It's also kind of funny though when they do actually render the cutscenes with your character outfits, because first of all, if you look out of place, and second of all, with like the tall hats and everything, every now and again there will be games that didn't really take that into account, and like all of a sudden like your outfit will be clipping and shit like that. It's also always hilarious.
Yep. Love it.
Yeah, I guess that probably, unless you have anything specific to say about realism in video games, I think that probably
no.
I think we just about
wrapping it there.
Hit the extreme there. Which would bring us to our final segment, that being the songs of the week. So I ask you, if I find the right button, there it is. What is your song of the week?
My song of the week is a song called "A Dream of You" by Far Caspian. So I have a YouTube subscription that I wound up getting a while back through Discord that I wound up keeping just because of the fact that they kind of cultivate playlists for you based off of what you've been listening to. And one of my favorite things to do since discovering that feature was that they have a My Mix section. And this is one of the songs that I discovered from that, where I usually like to listen to very like calm, kind of chill, more relaxing songs at night. And this is one of the songs that popped up on the playlist, and from that has kind of spawned a bunch of other songs that have a similar vibe, have a similar sound to them that I've really started to like, and it's become kind of like my go-to nightly playlist now of just kind of relaxing songs that I can kind of hang out to.
Yeah, I mean that's really cool, and I mean the when I first heard that, I was like, oh yeah, that seems very much like a song that you'd like. Yep, that I can see why you picked that as the song of the week. That certainly is very good character.
The funny thing is too, I thought I might switch it up a little bit, and there's this band called Chat Pile that I've discovered recently that is very noisy, very aggressive. It's almost like sludge metal mixed with noise rock, and I almost thought of putting one of their songs on the playlist on the weekly song for this week, and I just thought, that's too much of a departure from what I normally listen to.
Yeah, I guess my song of the week is also not that much of a departure. Then again, I think my songs of the week have been pretty broad over the years. And my song of the week is what is the band's name actually? Okay, there we are. Is Sunshine Reggae by Laid Back.
Sunshine Reggae. Don't worry, don't hurry. Take it easy. Sunshine Reggae. Let the good vibes get a lot stronger.
Yeah, so
reggae's always one of those things that I always vibe to if someone else has it on, and I always enjoy it when I hear it out in the wild. But it's one of those things that I never actually go through and listen to on my own. I should change that.
I mean, I feel like reggae songs for me are a bit hit or miss. The thing that I'm just going to mention it here. This is, of course, made by a Danish band, so this is reggae made by white people. For better or for worse, I mean, it's a lot of that. I like the song. That's about all that I can say about that. But yeah, no, it's just one of those kind of chill sort of summer vibe songs where, it's a very pleasant song to listen to. So I just had to pick a song of the week, and that's what I chose. Sometimes it's just not that deep. When you do this every week for like 5 years, well, 5.5 years at this point, so it's just at some point it's like, that's the song. So, anything else you want to say before we close this out?
I don't think so.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you have something to say, leave a comment. If you want to talk to us, I think you're also still in the DirectTV Discord server, so
I am, yes.
People want to find you. And subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this. And pimpkarp.
That's it, JJ.
That's it.